Hey guys and girls, Bored Now back with you. Happy October once again as I continue my 31 horror movie reviews for 31 days of the spooky season. So today I'm going to be talking about the original Tales from the Crypt movie from 1972. So this is what started it all really. Obviously you had the comics first, but I mean when it comes to the sort of big screen, or so this led to then the 80s HBO series, and since then you've had a couple of like 90s, maybe early 2000s. Certainly there was one film in the 90s. So this was obviously the thing that kicked all that off. You've got an all-star sort of British cast. You've got Ralph Richardson. I was trying to remember his first name, but Ralph Richardson plays the Crypt Keeper in this, and he summons a collection of guests to an underground cabin, and one by one he runs through the stories with them that all affect them and have all shown them to be malicious and sinister, and we find out at the end of the film that's why they're doomed to spend their lives in purgatory. So that's the storytelling device, and you get like interventions from these different guests saying, "Oh no, I was innocent. I didn't do anything wrong." But that's ultimately where we're heading towards the end, at the very end, and they have to spend the rest of their lives in purgatory. Like their sins are just so bad that they have to go down this hole effectively with light and go into some lava shit. So yeah, that's kind of how the film ends. So is it any good? It's not bad. It's a first time watch for me. I think it's the sort of thing that could get better on a rewatch, and my rating might be higher. I did find it a bit of a struggle this time at times. Some stories were better than others, which is always going to be the case. Until the end, I couldn't really see that much that linked them, but I think mostly maybe as a film there was just a bit of pacing issues. It just felt a little bit slow and plodding at times, and some of the stories as horror like stories just weren't that exciting. But it's definitely one of those things I'm going to rewatch, and I might get more into it the second time around. As I said, you've got a really strong sort of cast and some good stories, some not so good stories. One, like, because the opening story with this wife who marries rich, and she ends up killing her husband, assumably for his money. But then there's this twist where he comes back as Santa Claus, and I would say that's a really freaky imagery. The way they use like Santa Claus for something quite scary, and just as a jump scare, I thought that was pretty good. But yeah, the story itself did drag on a bit, and I think that's the problem with some of the stories is they do drag it on a bit. And then we kind of get the story from the other end of things, the other perspective, where there's this car accident, but it's the same couple in the car, and it turns out to be in his head sort of thing at first, where there's a car accident and he dies, but then he shows up again years later alive, and he freaks the wife out. But then when he comes in the house, he actually gets to see himself, and that he's got like sort of a dead face. So, but then he awakes from the nightmare, and they're in the car, and he says, "Well, I just had a bad dream." But then they sort of career off the side of the cliff for real. So it proves to be sort of real. The best story for me was definitely the Peter Cushing one. He gives another really good performance, very tender performance. He's this guy who has recently lost his wife, and he's just been like pranked and picked on by this guy who lives near him and knows him, and I think he might work for the same people as this guy, but there's just certain things like he's got some dogs and he has them taken away by the police, so someone's made a complaint, but there's just all this different stuff where this guy, for no good reason, is like maliciously pranking him and pulling tricks on him. So he starts sending him letters on like Valentine's Day, where he just sends him cards from everybody in the neighbourhood, and it, gets his emotions high because he is a lonely guy, and that's part of the thing of losing the dogs, is it makes him even more lonely. But yeah, just that, the Valentine's thing, and then one of the cards he actually writes a really nasty like message, where the message is telling the Peter Cushing character to commit suicide, which he ends up doing. He's really down, but like ultimately he comes back from the grave, and you see him in like grave form, like the living dead, and it's another really good jump out. There are a couple of standout jump out scenes in this film, and that's another one. That's a really freaky image and the way he looks, but he ultimately gets his revenge, which is really satisfying. But what makes that the best story, I think, is Peter Cushing's performance. Like, he's so tender, and you just feel for him and root for the character in a way. So there's a heart to that story, which probably there isn't to any of the others. But I actually learned a little tidbit from someone online before I recorded this review, who saw that I was watching the film, and they told me that part of the reason it comes across so well and feels so authentic is that Peter Cushing actually lost his wife in the run-up to doing this film. So it was like days before the film. So the grief he felt was actually real. So that's really something. And that comes across in the film. So very sad, but you can see partly why it's such an effective performance, because the grief was real. Definitely my favourite story. The last story wasn't too bad neither. Like, you got this actor who I really like, who's in A Clockwork Orange, and he's imprisons this guy and just plays a lot of like mind games with him and head games. He's got his dogs at some point. He's got him like trapped in this room, and it's kind of different sort of like games and tricks and stuff like that. But I like that actor because he plays like off the wall, unhinged very well, like he did a little bit in A Clockwork Orange. You've got a good cast, but that's a solid story. But overall, I think at times it just dragged. Maybe I wasn't quite in the right frame of mind for it, so I'm not going to go super high. But it is definitely one I could rewatch and get more into. So for now, I'm going to give it a solid 6 out of 10. So I won't go too high, but definitely one that's worth seeing, especially since it was the first like Tales of the Crypt on screen, and it has such a well-known cast in it as well, and it does feel like a bit of a staple that's worth checking out at least once. So that's today's review, Tales of the Crypt, the original movie, and I know I did one of the sequels in a previous year. I'll probably link that in this video, but if you've seen this Tales from the Crypt film, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always, and I'll be back tomorrow. In fact, it'll be me and Rachel back tomorrow with another horror movie review, so keep it tuned. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.